All righty, what's going on, everyone? It is us, Millennial Council of Gang, and we are here to talk about a really touchy subject, a really heavy gang subject, and it's in regards to touchy subject, a really heavy gang subject. My bad.
Yeah, do you have it on like on another tab or something?
I think I'm gonna have it. There we go. My bad.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh my God. I almost just heard my own voice for a second. That would have been tragic.
That was all me. My bad, y'all. My bad. There goes Toby.
Oh, okay.
There we go. And so we're talking about today's subject. Today's subject is called Identity Politics versus Pandering. And especially what the climate is going on as of right now, what we're seeing in our nation's capital, what's going on right now. And so we want to pretty much clear the air and actually sit down, have a conversation about what is the difference between identity politics and pandering. So does anybody want to go ahead and start us off and kind of give their thoughts, opinions?
I'll go. So I feel like identity politics have gotten so like the definition has gotten like really like vague and muddled almost, where it's like, you know, if you talk about a Black issue, it's identity politics because it doesn't relate to any other race or ethnicity or anything. And when that's not necessarily like identity politics, like I believe that the definition of identity politics is like kind of like when you're trying to move towards or you're trying to, you know, talk to like a particular group of people or a socioeconomic class or gender or, you know, something like that. So you're, you know, like if this section has like an issue or something, you talk about that. Whereas like pandering is just kind of like, for like a lack of a better term, kind of like shucking and jiving for a particular group of people, essentially. But yeah, like identity politics.
Way to go, Mark. Yeah.
Sorry. But yeah, like identity politics, like, you know, like it can be helpful, but it can also like make a lot of people feel left out, which is kind of like what the issue was with like the 2016 election, or like, because I was just reading how like Steve Bannon's like strategy was essentially like, oh, we see that Hillary Clinton is always talking about like LGBT, women, African American, et cetera, so we're going to talk about like the economy and things like that, which was and still is, you know, like a huge issue that was and is occurring, you know, especially with like the, you know, the massive job loss in like the Midwest, and, you know, and we all know as gang, you know, fanatics that we know that like those swing states that, you know, Donald Trump needed to win and did win was due to like the massive job loss, primarily due to automation. So like what I find sorry if I'm just kind of rambling.
No, go for it.
Yeah. Like what I found kind of like ironic is that because like Donald Trump, like, you know, spoke about like the economic issues in like those areas about, you know, like, oh, you lost all your jobs and we're going to get you your jobs back. It was in a way identity politics, like, because like, you know, it was relating to those people who, you know, lost their jobs. So they were like in their own like socioeconomic like group, because, you know, it's like, oh, nobody's talking about, you know, us who've lost our jobs. And it's like, oh yes, this guy's finally talking about this. He sees the issue. So even though it's not necessarily like race, even though like it primarily, if I'm not mistaken, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, it primarily hurt white people, I think white men especially. It's not like he necessarily had to say, hey, white men, I see your issues. with, the job loss. So therefore, I'm going to help you, white men. He didn't like say that, but like he was able to, talk to, a group of people who were and still are, having issues that, they probably didn't feel that the left was addressing. So like, I kind of found that to just be like a little bit ironic.
Yeah. Agreed. Toby, your thoughts?
Yeah. So kind of the definition, and I actually remember seeing something some weeks, maybe even a month ago, about how identity politics is one of those terms that kind of got hijacked, sort of like intersectionality, means something, and now it gets used everywhere, and like X word means whatever. So identity politics, I guess, was created by, may have been kind of coined by someone to talk about. The definition sort of says moving away from traditional party-based politics and issue-based politics, more towards the politics surrounding your identity, which could be religious, gender. Of course, you have like sexual orientation, race, and now, like you said, Al, it's kind of been taken to the point where if you talk about any kind of issue that's not, I guess, mainstream. So, like if it's not outside of what the majority already is, then it's like, oh, wow, that's identity politics, bro. Don't bring that up. But like, obviously, there are differences that exist. There are people with certain background and cultures. So, of course, people are going to feel certain types of way. Like in Florida, when you have things come up about, like in the Cuban community, like that's always a big topic, a big source of contention with Castro or Fidel Castro or whoever. Like, that's going to be something that they care deeply about, right? It's not like they're going to be like, oh, don't bring that up. It's identity politics, right? And of course, a lot of that community is more conservative too. And they care very much about that identity because they always talk about how they fled from these places. But that's just an example that you're going to have to naturally talk about your identity. And I mean, it might not rule exactly how you think in both cases, of course, but there are certain trends that are important. Now, the pandering aspect. So the identity politics is supposed to be, I guess, like people deriding issue-based, like race-based or specific-based issue, and usually people will assume that like you're telling people just to vote for you because of you being a certain way. So like, oh, there's a black person on the ticket, I guess I have to vote for them, or like it's a woman, I'm going to vote for them, even though it's never really that. Usually that not that straightforward. Like you might have a tendency of more women maybe were supporting Elizabeth Warren, more Asian people were supporting Yang, on and on. But it's typically that there's some issues that are being highlighted. But the identity politics is sort of the derisive term that's just like, oh yeah, you're just voting for them because of X. I think Bernie actually said something like this after the last election, that he's saying like, I'm not a fan of saying that I'm a woman, you should vote for me because I'm a woman, which I mean is not exactly always what's happening. It can be an oversimplification of the kind of phenomenon that's going on when people do talk about identity issues. Now, pandering, you sort of have, I guess you're trying to appeal to a certain base, and I guess it's supposed to be looking like, oh, I want to do something that's going to make them want to vote for me. And again, that's kind of another derisive term where if you unleash a plan for a certain group or you kind of speak to certain people's issues, they're going to say that you're just pandering or you're trying to like what's a great example? I mean, I feel like there's just a lot. I mean, of course, you have the current ticket. Like, are people saying that Kamala Harris is just on there to like pander to, or like to like, or Biden and Harris pandering to the black community? I mean, I've seen definitely like a lot of black people kind of saying things along the lines of, I don't need a black face. I don't need more representation. We had that before. I'm good. What are the policies that are going to affect our communities? And of course, Ice Cube. I didn't really watch what Ice Cube had actually said, but you did.
No, I didn't.
You didn't either. Yeah. So, but it kind of sounds in general that's like, we don't just need a black face. We need substance. So people will kind of feel like they're being pandered to when you have these shallow sort of. And I'm not saying that's the exact reason why Harris was chosen, but there are people who will feel like, all right, I'm going to need more to go to get out the vote than just the fact that there's a black woman or woman with black heritage on the ticket. So pandering, without going too deep with all the examples now, it's just kind of that like politician outreach not necessarily because identity politics can maybe be that they're trying to relate to a certain group, and then you're saying something like, oh, I'm XYZ group, so you should vote for me. But pandering, I guess, is the politician or whoever trying to and sometimes corporations are accused of pandering. Maybe they'll a good example is when this was on Capitol Hill with the Democrats wearing the kente cloth during Juneteenth or during some point.
Yeah,
now,
that seemed like pandery because
it's the interesting thing about that was that they were apparently asked by the Congressional Black Caucus or something.
Right, that's true. Yeah.
So sometimes that's the other thing is there are times where the community has invited you to do a certain thing and you do it. Maybe you look a little out of place, you look a little funny, and people are like, oh, wow, you're just pandering. But that's not necessarily the case. A good example, and I can get to these examples later because, oh my goodness, but was, Yang being invited to a Black church and he was here clapping and singing, doing his thing, getting the worship on. And he was invited to be in there, but the clip didn't show the context. So it was just him in the church. And I remember after he dropped out, he talked to, Charlemagne the God on the Breakfast Club. And Charlemagne was like, I really thought that the mistake you made was going there to that church. And Yang was like, no, I was invited. And they were like, oh yeah, that's just Black pressure. You can't. They say you can't say no when the Black pressure gets put on you and they tell you to do something, you got to do it. So
right, it's true because you don't want to because none of us were at the church. At least I don't think, but none of us were at the church, and so we didn't know what was going on because sometimes you do something, it's it seems like a good idea. It's oh, everybody's happy that yeah, sure. And then, to the rest of the world, it's oh, he's just pandering, blah, 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 this and that. When it's just no, it was probably just, good old fashioned church.
Yeah, you could kind of tell because everybody that was in the choir stand, they all had on robes. And I remember that interview that he did on the Breakfast Club. And he said that he was asked to kind of come in and join. He was kind of no, there's somebody in the choir put on the choir robe on him and then kind of basically almost pushed him on stage. And so he was you can't say no in that point. You can't say no, I don't want to do it. Right. And of course, for obvious reasons. Number one, you don't want to seem as if you're pandering, trying to get the Black vote. You don't want to feel like that. But at the same time, you also don't want to be disrespectful either at the same time, because a lot of people, that's what they have to cling on to. And if they say, okay, we see him, he's at the church, even though he may not be there for whatever the reason is because of the fact he wanted to kind of get a basic understanding of the Black culture and how most Black folks surround themselves in the church. Mm-hmm. How he could get immersed into that. That's just one aspect.
Right.
And so with that being said, he said he learned a lot, but I think it should be, I don't want to say the norm, but it should be a way for politicians to reach out, to to go to certain places where Black folks are normally going to be predominantly at. Even if you're just there to kind of enjoy the service and just to kind of get a feel, an understanding of what the average Black person goes through. Best way to talk to them after church on Sundays. Most of the time, that's what they're looking forward to. Not to say that every Black person goes to church. No, let's get that straight. Not everybody goes to church. Okay, right. Not every Black person goes to church either. The ones that do go, that's where they go because of the fact that they need something. What's up, Jeannie? Hey, brother.
Hey.
And a lot of them feel rejuvenated. They feel refreshed. And that's their way to kind of find some kind of bond, And then, with this topic too, with identity politics versus pandering, it goes to show that when we talk about certain issues, and especially when it comes to Black issues, we have to kind of take that stigma off and say, no, there's been a lot of policies that have been passed that have not catered to the Black community as a whole. And so specifically, what are you doing? Which is why a lot of us, when we were searching, did our research on Andrew Yang, we say, okay, UBI, yes, that is a positive. That is a good policy that's pro-black. It did decriminalization of marijuana, and try to make it for how do you put it, for like recreational use. Like, yes, that would free a lot of people that's behind bars for non-violent crimes, but yet they got locked up because they had a dime bag on them, or they had a joint on them. They
probably just smelled like weed.
Exactly, they just smelled like it, and so here they are behind bars for like months, years on end. When in all actuality, they could have just took the stuff away from them and said, hey, now you here, or at least pay a fine. But even still, it'll put them in a bigger bind. And so this idea of doing something to, and I'm choosing my words. I want to choose my words carefully.
Okay.
We don't want to come off as so saying, we want to hand out. No, we want to hand up, and we need specific policies that's going to get us there. We need specific policies that's going to outline and address what we need, especially as young Black citizens in this United States that are looking like, hey, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this, we've done our research. What policies do you have that's going to give me that hand up that I need, especially in the midst of what's going on now with the economic crisis going on, with the healthcare crisis that's going on. And I mean, some people, they're losing their jobs. Some people are losing their homes. What policies are you putting in place that's going to help us out specifically? And then it doesn't become identity. It becomes of, okay, what solution do you have that's going to help alleviate my problem? If you don't have a solution that's going to help alleviate my problem, I'm not voting for you. You don't have my support.
Right. I do want to ask a question.
Go for it.
Do you think that there should be like particular laws in place for people of color and women and things like that? Or do you feel that laws should just be like across the board, just like equal across the board? Like, I feel like in a perfect world, it should be like equal across the board. However, like once they're like enforced, that's when it starts to become very unequal.
Yeah, I hear you. And I would say that there should be some kind of policy put in place. It may not have to say this is specifically for Black people, but this will help Black folks in any other community of color that's in that same boat as Black folks to get ahead, to be able to have an equal playing field, to be able to have that level playing field, to be able to do something, And I think Mark, he's going to put it up. He said something too. I'm going to show it. And he's absolutely right. He is right. And when you think about it, and I'll take UBI for a perfect example. Because of the fact that it wasn't pro-Black, it didn't have, specifically for African Americans. It wasn't just that. It was more so of, hey, I want to give you $1,000 for the rest of your life. Once you become the age of 8, when you turn 18, for the rest of your life, you'll get $1,000. That basically was to help people in poorer income neighborhoods to be like, okay, I'm working at McDonald's. I'm only making, let's say
$750.
Exactly, $750. I'm only working 20 hours a week. That's not enough to pay my rent. But if I get that plus that $1,000, I can use part of that $1,000 to go ahead and get my rent paid. And then everything else could go towards, electricity, utilities, this is that and the third, and whatever I have left over. I could use that to do something else, like maybe, start investing or put it in a savings account so I can buy a house or buy a car, work on my credit, do something that's going to help uplift me. And knowing that the next month I'm gonna still get that $1,000, and I'm cool. I don't have nothing else to really worry about.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge boost. And so now you've done given power and money to people who for years have none. Now you give them that. Now they're able to do what they need to do, not only for themselves, but for their families. You give them that floor to stand on. And so all they have to do is build up from that foundation,
right,
and pretty much leave some type of legacy for their children, their grandchildren, and even the generations that come after those.
Okay.
Yeah. So my thought, because an example that came up in my head was even the Violence Against Women Act, right? That's a specific law that was made. And yes, in general, not committing violence, sexual violence, domestic violence could be some kind of standard law. But of course, we see who the violence is mostly committed against. So you have a law kind of addressed to them. I guess you have like the Equality Act, and I mean that's like kind of a general. You can't be fired, discriminated against for your sexual orientation, but really, it's geared towards people who are identifying LGBT. Like ideally, you kind of have a law that just is kind of makes it flat, and that helps everyone. But sometimes you might have to mention certain protected groups by name because they're the ones who have been on the receiving end of whatever discrimination for decades, centuries, and so on. So this again kind of comes into where people feel like, oh, why do you have to make stuff for specific people? Well, of course, if you look at the data and how things are, certain people have been affected the most, right? Like if you see certain disparities, health disparities, we talked about, I think briefly, the other week when we were talking about Yang Fitness, like there's health disparities in the Black communities where even at equal levels of income, equal levels of education, equal levels of basically success, you still see more disease. Like sometimes it's like, what's the word? Genetic. Sometimes it's like from environment, from actually there's literally evidence that shows that even like stress and trauma is passed down from generations.
Yeah.
This has been shown for Black people. This has been shown, I believe, even for like survivors of the Holocaust. It's been shown for many groups. So when you have things like
epigenetics, I think.
Epigenetics is so I think that's the name of the field. It's actually very fascinating. I knew people who did research in it like when I was in college. But and like when you see these kind of disparities and you see these different inequalities, it makes sense that okay, we're gonna have a law or something that's gonna help even these things, that we're gonna have something, maybe a study commissioned or something that helps kind of the outcomes not be so lopsided when you have the Black woman maternity death rate
maternal,
and it's just like 350% higher for Black women. Yeah, you're going to need to have something on the books that's going to help, find out like what is it, the bias, the conditions of the hospital, the just the way that interactions happen. You might have to have something that's kind of legislated. Like generically, you could say we're going to, but it's like, why be just so generic if we know that the reason is that the disparity affects certain people groups for whatever the issue is. So I do think it is necessary in some cases, to mention by name. Unfortunately, there's and I think anathema is just like oh gosh, you mentioned a certain group and now it's like a political firestorm. So sometimes people have to be like as slick with it, I guess, as they can be, so that they can still help out whatever group they're trying to help without getting some big backlash, which really in my head shouldn't be existing. But people are people, so trying to make it as universal as possible while still trying to lift up the certain groups that are struggling more, being discriminated against.
How about you, El?
What? What?
Well, you asked the question as far as should there be? Oh, I'm trying to remember.
Well, like laws, like
yeah.
Oh, right. Because I thought I kind of answered, but like, I just feel that like, I mean, I do see like why that some laws, I guess need to like be pointed towards, like a particular group or like, but I don't know, because I always feel like there would be like some sort of like weird like loophole that people try to pull or like say or do or something. But at the same time, like when you make laws like that are just like equal across the board, once again, like enforcing it, it's like, oh, you can't fire somebody based off of their sexual orientation, but I can, make their work lives a lot harder. Therefore, they get stressed out and then they get worse at their job. And then I can fire them for, I can mistreat them or what have you. But like, I guess there's like no perfect thing, like, because there's no perfect people, no offense. And so like, you're going to find people who are just going to like not like you very much because you're Black, because you're gay, because you're a woman, or just because like your looks or something, you're not going to be perceived as like, you're not going to matter as much, so to speak.
And
so,
not to cut off, but there was something I was the Crown Act. So this is a great example.
There's the Crown Act, and actually, because that's been coming up more in recent, people have been talking about more in the recent months, how, you can't be discriminated against by your hair. Passed in California, passed in maybe a total of 12 or 13 states, if that. But most states, there is no law in the book that you can't be discriminated by your hair type. So you see a lot of people with dreadlocks, twists, just even natural hair that's nappy and not, straightened, long and flowing. People were told that you have to cut it, you have to get it in a different style, or else maybe they can't compete in the sport. They can't work in sometimes even like a call center or like as a greeter at Six Flags, some strange stuff where it's just like, this makes no sense to have this.
Who can see you at a call center? It's like, oh, I can tell he has nappy hair. I can hear it. I can hear it in his voice.
So it's kind of weird. So it's like, I remember a friend of, like, before I actually heard of the Crown Act, but I remember some years ago I posted something about how it sucked and it was so bad that these laws were on the book. And one friend of mine who is pretty liberal himself actually said that he thinks that it's better that it's not put into law, because he said they will find another way to discriminate against you. It's better that they tell you up front that, we're not going to have you for your hair. Then you could post on your social media. I mean, this is me more inserting my thoughts. You can post on social media, and then people are going to be like, yo, this company sucks. Like, I remember Six Flags told one like 16 or 17-year-old guy with dreads, like, you can't work here. And then like they said he had to cut his hair, but instead, like, he kind of posted about it on Instagram or Facebook, and then a modeling agency was like, hey, we think you look great, let's get you a job. And now this guy probably has tens of thousands of followers on Instagram, and he's a whole model. And he might be 18 now, but he was young. Like that. Like sometimes some people say it's actually better not to have some of those laws in the books, because then people can very freely say the quiet part out loud. We don't want you because you're XYZ. Some people say that even about like the LGBT protections. It's better that you just like don't, like, that you're told why that you're being discriminated against. I'm sure no one who's LGBT would agree that that's better, but I know it does bring in the debate of maybe the loopholes are going to come up. Maybe we shouldn't have a law based off of race, because at the end of the day, someone's going to find a reason to like reject you anyway, or someone's going to find a reason to they're going to, like you said, make your life harder, to the point where I was actually even thinking where you're going to quit voluntarily, but also to the point where you get fired, and they can say these infractions happen, and then you can't really fight it, and it's just done. Now, I mean, my opinion on it, I do think it's good, of course, to have these laws, but I see the concern in what people are saying. So that should be an active discussion for if you do have these kind of laws based off of specific people's identities, based off of like no discrimination, which of course is good. How do you sort of get around the loopholes, and all of a sudden the people who start to like, to find creative ways to basically discriminate. But that's kind of my, I guess, final thought on that one. Yeah.
I want to read a question that Mark posted. He asked, how can you connect and increase Black ownership to the Black Lives Matter movement in the country without scaring white people? And he would love to see where reparation pulls nowadays. So just to kind of go to that first part, how do you think Gang can kind of like bridge that narrative with as far as making sure that the Black Lives Matter movement is actually ran by actual Black people, and how we could, again, bridge that gap to kind of like show forth, like, you can own something that's positive, and here's the steps on how to do it. How do you think that, how or Yang could move across? Because I'll look at it like this.
Okay. Yeah.
I look at it like this. If we could show that the Black Lives Matter movement as a whole is ran by Black people. No whites, no nothing. It's ran by Black folks. Like the NAACP, for an example.
Mm-hmm.
Ran by Black folks. It shows that, yes, there's power and unity, but at the same time, it shows that you can own something, that you can be a part of something positive, and use that to kind of get that message across. And especially if you have politicians that are running that have gone tone deaf as far as what's going on in their own communities, I think it will give more Black people a sense of power, and, as many people would say, a good seat at the table and say, hey, we see your track record as far as what you're doing in DC, or we see your track record as far as what you're doing in the state house, and we see that the laws that you signed off on, it doesn't affect this community. We want you to pass laws that affects this community, due to the fact it's not, whatever you're doing is not working. And so by giving Black folks that sense of power, that sense of ownership, now it's like, okay, the sky's the limit now. I know if I could own this little small nonprofit organization, then I could use that to go help open another nonprofit, or I could use that to go help another business or start another business that's for profit, and then use that money to funnel into my community. So that way I take ownership of my community, that the people that I'm serving with, we all take ownership and we help grow our community from the inside out. Because obviously the lawmakers, whether they're state level or federal level or even local level, if they're not willing to do it, then we should do it ourselves. And I think that would kind of, and especially with Yang bringing in that idea of being able to have capital extended to the lower income communities and being able to get access to it, that would help out a lot. That would help out huge, because in most Black neighborhoods, most Black people who want to start businesses and have good business plans and good business ideas, the thing that they're lacking in is the actual capital to go ahead and get that business going. Versus you look at some of the white organizations and then more so white neighborhoods, man, they got organizations popping up left or right, and they got people pouring money into them and not really thinking nothing else about it. But it's a simple fact of the matter of, they got an organization, it's for the good, for the community, and they just leave it there. And I feel as though if they were to say something as far as the lines of, making sure that Black folks get capital and not get raped by the banks because they're taking out X amount of money to go to get their business started, I think that would be key. And that's my thoughts.
I definitely agree with it's just that there definitely just needs to be some sort of like more capital in the Black communities, of course. Like, I guess I was sort of thinking, and I know that this is kind of like a bad word I'm about to say, but like if there was like some sort of like Black super PAC, where like, it's like, oh, okay, we're a Black super PAC, and like you donate into this, which I think there's some that do exist. But I got to do some more research on that. And like they're for like more progressive, more UBI centered, like UBI focused candidates, and they like pour money into like these candidates to like really try to push UBI, because like what Yang said, that like people just follow the money. Like the reason why like a lot of these like really good progressive candidates just like aren't winning is because of just lack of money. Like grassroots can definitely sometimes beat out people, just like not all the time.
True.
Sometimes sometimes people like, however you have to advertise to your community, it's like whether it's through, I don't know, commercials on Hulu, like yard signs, events, it's just so like there needs to be like some sort of money funding. It's like, hey, here's the money so you can rent a car to go to like this particular event because you don't have a car, but we really support you, or like, or here's money for like some yard signs that you could give out for free at one of your rallies, right, your events. Here's some bumper stickers, things like that. Because like, like a lot of the times, people, especially for local, a lot of times like people just vote based on like the name. I know I've been there, like, and like I feel like identity politics can kind of fall into this, where it's just like, oh, that person sounds like a Black woman, or like this person sounds like a Muslim woman, or this person sounds like a Jewish man, so I'm gonna vote for him. And like these are like thoughts I've actually had from voting, because it's just like, oh, like commercials and everything's like they're just focusing on like, in my case, in South Florida, it was like the sheriff was like a really big thing, this election. And so like, I started did like my research on like the sheriffs. I watched like this big like Zoom call debate thing. I don't know if it was a debate, it was like some round table of them just talking about some of their things. And so like the sheriff was the big thing, but I made sure to like do my research on the candidates this time, because like I don't want to be in that position where I'm just like, I don't know who this judge is. I'll just vote for the top person, or the person whose name sounds like a Black woman, like.
Right. I hear you. Guilty.
Right. Glad I wasn't the only one.
No. Oh no, guilty.
Yeah. Now I'm glad that there's things like Vote 411.org, where it's like, oh, this is what's on your ballot. It's like, yeah, thank you. That's what, like, I'm sitting here looking everywhere for like what's going to be on my ballot, but it's like, it should be more obvious, because I just I'm not going to be like trying to vote for people in Orlando when I don't live in Orlando.
Right. There's a cool website that I found. It's called Voter 401 voter401.org.
Vote 411. .org. Yeah.
And so basically, it gave me a huge rundown on all the elections that are going on, and especially when it comes to like the certain districts that are predominantly Republican, and how the Republican candidates square up against the Democratic candidates. And it's very funny how the responses, especially when it comes to things like education, healthcare, the economy, criminal justice, you see a lot of different things that are going on, but at the same time, and a lot of them never really fully get addressed. It was like, yeah, we want to say this, because we think it's going to get us votes, but when it's actually come time for us to do what we said we're going to do, we don't want to show up. And what's going on, Fred?
Hey.
Nice to see you in the chat.
Oh, snap. Frederick Hatcher.
Yep, he's in here. Hey. Yeah, but again, a lot of the people, they probably just don't know. Like, for instance, my mom, she was like, yeah, I'm ready to go vote. And she's like, well, there's a Black guy running. I should vote for him. I'm like, nah, you don't want to vote for him. She's like, why? I'm like, well, he's a Trump supporter, and he backs Trump 1,000%. Like, nah. If you think Trump is loony, the Black guy you're trying to vote for, he's just as loony as well. And she's like, ooh, really? I'm like, yeah, you probably want to do your research before you start voting. And she's like, oh, that's a good idea. And and she's like, well, where can I go? And so I kind of gave her a little bit of an insight where to go. Again, if you vote 411.org, and I told her, like, you go there and you look at all the representatives that are running, and, and you look at them and you check them out and you see what are they trying to do for us, what are they trying to do for this community, and then you take it up to the state level. What are they trying to do on the state level to help us being pass legislation to kind of help the whole state as an overall. And then from there, you look at the candidate that's running for the federal level, going into, let's say, the U.S. House of Representatives, see what they're trying to do. All that adds up. It's just, wow. And so I'm like, yeah, the more research you do, the more accurate you will make a decision. And I haven't posted I'm not active on Facebook, but I have a Facebook, and I basically said the same thing. Like, you guys, do your research before November. Do your research before elections so you know who's running. And if you have the opportunity to meet that candidate one-on-one via Zoom or Skype or whatever the case may be, and talk directly to that candidate and see what this person is trying to do for your community, do that. Because now you can literally hold that person accountable and say, hey, you ran this last cycle. You didn't do what you said that you were going to do. I'm not voting for you. If you want to earn my vote, what are you going to do this election cycle?
Right.
Yeah. And actually that what you said, especially about your mom, like, nothing disrespectful or anything, but that is more playing into the identity politics of, like, okay, the person is kind of my background. I'll look. I mean, you said, like, we've all done it. I don't have a very rich voting history. I was not old enough to vote in 2012. I was literally 17. So I couldn't even. And even at that point, I was like, do I vote for Obama? I was like, I don't know enough. I had just gotten into college, my first semester. That was my first fall semester. So I'm like, everyone, of course, is like, Obama. But, like, it was one of those things where I didn't even know enough to make, like, an intelligent decision. Not that I, like, was in love with Romney or anything. I didn't have any issue with Obama, but I kind of realized, man, I don't, like, really understand all of this. And I feel like I don't have a good reason of voting or doing, XYZ. 2014, I didn't know how important governor's races are and all that stuff. It's actually funny because now that's when we got a Republican governor in Maryland, who, I mean, has common sense, and he's definitely not Trump and a lot of other stuff. But I haven't, like, had as much of the experience of, like, oh, who's on the ballot? Is the person, like, black or whatever? I think in 2016, I voted absentee. And I do remember seeing some people down ballot, and there was one guy who was black, I think particularly Nigerian or Ghanaian. So I was like, oh, look, he's also West African like me. But I didn't remember he was actually a Republican. And I mean, in general, like, I would think that, like, but I mean, I always when I was first registered to vote, I was independent anyway.
Right.
But I'm gonna have certain views that seem to lean more Democratic or left or whatever, or liberal. So it's kind of like I am trying to do a better job at, like, kind of looking at everything holistically. I mean, maybe there is, like, an independent or Republican who somehow is just knocking the socks off all the other candidates. I don't want it to just be, okay, here's the Democrat. Okay, this one's black. Let's go.
Right.
Now there are cases like with Cori Bush in Missouri, I believe, and other people where it's, like, clearly, like, the identity there's something bigger than the fact. I mean, the fact that she's a black woman is powerful. That she's an activist who now overtook someone who, was in, like, basically like a family, not
for like 50 years. Yeah, the family was, like, in that position for 50 years.
Yes, and so, like, of course, in that case, all the candidates were black, but there's something more core about what she was representing, and that's the kind of place where I'm trying to be, where I can like look at sort of those core messages and still factor in the fact that this is some historic victory, but I wouldn't want someone who's just, like, against my own values but happens to share my skin or background. And that's unfortunately what ends up happening when people do just say, I'm gonna just vote for this person because they're black or they're a woman or they maybe even are religious in the same way I am. I mean, sometimes that community and that sense of community is there, but yeah, that's just kind of, like, again, a little thing I picked up from what you had said.
I feel like and like of course you guys could share your opinions on this, like when you're voting and you don't quite know everybody and it's just like, oh, this person sounds like a black, I feel like it's kind of like, oh, I kind of also want a black person there because I feel like they would represent me more. I feel like things would be slightly better for me, when that's not always the case. Like sometimes people feel like, oh, if there's more black cops, then there'll be less shooting. Or it's like, oh, well, if a black cop shoots a black man, then that's not racist. And it's like, oh yeah, it totally can be. And like sometimes the black cops are like way more crazy, more strict than the white cops on black people, just to like double down on it, to make it to separate, like like some sort of separatism.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I guess just to say, like, it's not always wise to just like, go conjure up to like identity politics when it comes to just like voting blindly, because like there was somebody in my county who was a black woman. I was trying to tell everybody, I was like, hey, don't vote for her. Like, cause like she's not the best in my opinion, but like she still won. And I wonder if it's like because like, I don't know, like I live in like a very Democratic county, Broward. Like it's the most Democratic county in Florida. So like, like black women and women of color and things like that, like running is not strange at all.
Right.
And like it's good to be on the Democratic ticket because you're more than likely to win. And like people change from Republican to Democrat to vote, to actually get a seat in an office. But yeah, just like, and it was like, I remember I tried to convince my sisters, like, hey, don't vote for this woman, like, she's kind of stuck in the past and like, not really going more towards digital things, and like the people who work with her don't really like her. But like my sister was just like not really agreeing with what I was having to say. She was like, I don't really see why things need to be fully digital or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I was just kind of thinking like, well, it seems like the morale of the workers are really, really sad, and they really want her out, as someone who has been at, at companies where like, you just really can't wait until their boss leaves, like, man, why can't they just find another job? Like so it's like, I kind of felt for them. But unfortunately, it looks like she's going to be reelected. So.
Yeah, I hear you. I want to go back because Fred, he posted a very interesting question. He said, what are our thoughts on schools being funded based on property values? So
I'm not. Oh, sorry, you were going. No, I was really just going to say I'm a bit ignorant on the topic, but I've heard recently that property taxes are what I thought funds public schools. Honestly, like when it comes to the working of a lot of these systems, I still have way more to like learn. But I have heard the concept of like land value tax and some other things that are a bit more like innovative. But you go ahead and say what you were about to say.
Well, I'm going to answer that because the county that I live in, St. Joseph County here in Michigan, and is predominantly Republican. And I know every so often on the ballots, the question comes of how about as far as increasing property taxes to kind of pay for schools, to pay for roads, to help renovate school buildings themselves, kind of get everything up to date. And for the most part, I'm like, I'm not against that. Like, I'm for that. But in reality, when you look at the schools in the neighborhood that I live in, they're falling way behind. Like the classrooms, they're not modernized. The way how the buildings look, it's not like something that you would see in the 21st century. A lot of things need to be updated. And so it's like, you want me to pay taxes to make sure that this funding of the schools are done, but yet my child is still getting an education that's hardly competitive to someone clear across the globe. Or matter of fact, somebody that's not even within the next county over, next 2 counties over. And so it's like, if you want me to do this, I need to see some tangibles. I need to see where is it going, how's it being implemented, and if it's being implemented in the right way. Or are you saying, hey, we're going to go ahead and raise taxes on the property and we're going to do this, but yet paying off the people on the school board, and the school board's not even doing anything with it. Mm-hmm. So now it's like, now we got a whole big dilemma on our hands. And it's not like the county that I live in, it's not really the richest county, but it's not the poorest county either. And so it's like, there's a lot of things that need to be given and taken in order for it to be competitive with other schools, And it just like not too long ago, we just took a trip up to Kalamazoo, came back down to Three Rivers, and the schools that we passed on the way here, the one middle school, the one high school looks like a mini college. Like literally, it looks like a mini college. It has the bleachers, the track field, the football field. It has like 4 or 5 different basketball hoops, courts that people can play on. Everything is up to date, it's modernized. And it's like, you come to our city, we even got that. We got the one decent football field with a decent track. But other than that, there's really nothing else. There's really nothing that's going to motivate the kids to want to come to school, to want to get an education, to want to be something, to do something. And, if they want to stay in the city, to put back into the city or, go outside and adventure the world and make something of themselves. Those are my thoughts, Fred.
I mean, I think that we should, I don't know, like defund prisons and then invest that into schools, honestly. I don't feel that like schools should be the same across the board. You can't just be like, oh, I'm in a poor area and I go to a poor school and I have this poor life. I just have to live in all this poorness. Like that's so stupid when you think about it. It's like, oh, you have to use the poor textbook and it's like why can't we just get like everybody, like all schools should have like the same types of equipment, the same types of books, the same types of schooling. I can understand like private schools, I guess probably need more because like they actually put money into it, but like I don't know, like I feel like that's just like another form of like segregation and separatism because like like in certain schools like that there's like they can teach them certain things or like in certain or better ways, and then these kids can excel higher, and it's like, oh, but if you're in a public school you gotta just hope for the best, like hope that you're in a good zip code. I don't know what to tell you, kid.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Toby.
No, I was just gonna say, like, yeah, it's there's so much about the education system I need to like really learn because obviously I've gone through. I went through public school basically most of my life. I want to say 3rd grade onwards, but I really don't know like all the intricacies and like why certain things are like just the fact that you have these poor areas. I mean, Maryland has very good public schooling. Like at one point, it was either the #1 public school or public high school in the country, and just like it's just good. But then you have Baltimore, which like not to be all doom and gloom, there are parts that are very much in need of help, just like you have with like a lot of these other cities. And it's just like crazy to see these kind of stark differences. New York City, I've heard, is like the most segregated in the country, and you think about how liberal and progressive the state is, or at least the city is, and like what's happening with like these differences. Like I don't know what it is that needs to be done so that you kind of guarantee sort of the equal opportunity. And people talk about that. Like some people have talked about the entrance exams can be like they not that they get rid of it, but it shouldn't be so strictly used for entrance exams where you have to pay more money to get prepped for it. Kind of how people talk about the SAT and the GRE, how those are tests that maybe need to go because they really just favor people who have better socioeconomic status. Though some people say those tests at least help give you playing field. But the point is like there needs to be a more holistic conversation that talks of like that, you need to put in a lot of money, I guess, at every level of education. And I mean, kind of like I remember there was a interview that Yang had done with The Root like a while back, and Yang talked very broadly about how we need to give everyone opportunity. And I guess the guy in The Root was really pushing them, like, what are you going to do specifically for Black America? And I mean, Yang kind of was saying, like, if there are certain disparities, I guess, with education and with, like, money going to certain districts, there would basically be overcompensation with sending more money to those. I mean, it was a little bit vague, but I do wonder, like, okay, what is the way that you sort of, find these communities that clearly are struggling more? And it's not going to just be Black communities. I'm sure you'll see some poor rural white areas in the mountains or in different, definitely certain states that have not great outcomes. But there's just a lot, like, with all this conversation about race, I think that's like a huge thing that needs to be talked about. Like, if these companies want to do something really, really like profound, they can put Black Lives Matter on their website. They can do whatever, but you can really, like, some, thankfully, like I think Adidas and there was some boycott power that happened. See, this is like real, like, politics and real power. It goes beyond just like, for show and like, oh, it's like, no, you're making real power. Like, people basically boycotted. Black employees, I think, of Adidas boycotted and said, we're not going to work here until certain changes are made. And I think Adidas then was like, we're going to put some hundreds of thousands into certain Black communities and neighborhoods. And that right there is going to be huge. Putting the money into education in certain areas that have been lacking is so that you can have the correct equipment. Pay teachers more. I mean, that's a huge one. Make sure that you're retaining good teachers. I need to look more at that data, but of course you always hear that paying teachers is going to be one of the top things you can do to improve outcomes. And then you have we talk more about education in another episode, but the promise, like LeBron James' I Promise School. I mean, when you put so much money and resources and making sure that kids are doing well mentally, like physically, that they have food, they have shelter, their scores skyrocket. Like in Akron, I believe, and that's where the Promise School is. Akron, Ohio. It's just like that kind of thing. I mean, yeah, that's a lot of investment, but that kind of thing would need to happen in many areas, essentially, to like increase these outcomes and like actually have the kids go through the school pipeline and not prison, not whatever other problems end up happening. Like, if you drop out, the rate of being in prison or whatever is just so much more. And I don't know, like, it's a conversation that still needs to be had, but like really investing deeply into education, not just like in a way that sounds good, but like seriously, like, what are we doing to fix certain communities and improve kids' lives, improve well-being, because that is going to change so much. And I mean, it's still a conversation that needs to be had, but that was kind of my thought right there.
Yeah, agreed. I think that education, period, we're going to have to make that one into an episode. And it's just due to the fact that with education being such key fundamentals, like, again, I could bring up the Kalamazoo Promise here in Michigan and how that's helped, and how a lot of big name colleges and universities have poured into that, and a lot of big name companies have poured into it just to make sure that kids that go to these public schools in Kalamazoo, that they get the quality education, and that when they graduate, that they can go to a college, university, get their associates, and if they decide to stay in Michigan, especially in Kalamazoo, to be able to pour back into the community, that's huge. Oh, that is so huge, and I think that will be a very interesting topic, because again, you got the I Promise that Toby brought up, you got the Kalamazoo Promise, and then there's probably like other model schools that are doing something to kind of help get these kids on a track to success, and be able to succeed and be able to do what's needed. So yes, education, we're going to have to do that in another episode. So I'm going to wrap this up. Is there any final thoughts you guys have before we end the show?
I do have like a final thought question. I hope I could take up a little bit more of you guys' time.
Go for it.
Go for it.
It's kind of a random question, but do you think pandering ever works? Or have there been instances or situations where pandering actually worked?
Well, let's see.
Like I don't even have an answer for this, honestly.
I would say pandering could work. It could work if it's done for the right reason. And what I mean is this, is that if you know that, actually, no, I take that back. I'm gonna use what this is going on in this election cycle as of right now. In my district, there's two people,
Okay.
there's a Democrat, there's a Republican. Okay. And with this Republican, the main big three things he has: he's pro-gun, he's pro-life, pro-Trump.
Okay.
That's it. Okay. And so when he's asked about certain issues as far as healthcare, as far as mental health, as far as getting people out of prison because of drug abuse and put them in rehab, he has no questions. He has no answers. He's like, I don't want to talk about it. And the sad thing about it is he's not even from the community itself. He's not even from the city. He's from somewhere else. He's from outside the city. But with him moving down here, it's like, okay, we all know that there's a huge Republican base in this county, period.
Mm-hmm.
And so if he can cozy up to a lot of the Republicans that are pro-gun, pro-life, pro-Trump, he could use that as an easy win to get into the state seat. And it's like, come on now. That's not going to solve nothing. You're not going to solve the issues that we need. You're not going to solve the fact that our county jail is filled with people that are using drugs that need help and not to get locked up for the rest of their life. You got folks in the county prison who, quite honestly, probably been there, far too long for a crime that probably doesn't even fit the time. You got roads and dams in the county that need to be replaced, that need to be fixed. You got the local economy in these small cities that are slowly but surely getting sucked dry because everything is getting pushed outward and not coming in. Like, you're not solving anything. You're making matters worse, And so in that aspect, that's where I see it going wrong. Now I see it going right as this. The Democrat that's running is the lady that I'm supporting. She's like, I don't know how to reach out to Black folks. I don't know anything about what it's like to be Black. I don't know what it feels like to have the state troop or the county sheriff ride up on you, flash your lights, and you get pulled over and get Black. And the first thing is in your mind is, are you going to be able to go home? I don't know anything about that. I don't know what it means to be Black and walk down the street and have someone say the N-word to you. I don't know that. I don't live that life. And so she's reaching out and it's like, can you help me? Because obviously you're a young Black man with a young Black family, and this is the life that you live. Can you help me to reach out to other young Black people? And there's another guy, he's a bit older than me. He's a huge activist, but even still asking him for help. And he's like, yeah, sure. We have no issues with that because we understand that you don't know anything about what it's like to be Black. We understand that, yes, you're a farmer and you know everything about farmer life, but when it comes to the city and it comes to being Black in the city, you know nothing about, And I think in that aspect, especially trying to get put in front of Black folks to kind of talk to them and see what their needs are and what she can do to help them out in that aspect, I think that's where pandering can actually be useful, because now it's not all about, I want your votes. Like, I want your vote because I want to solve the issues that you're facing. I want your vote because I want to help you live a better life and have a better quality of life. I want your vote because I want to make sure that the generations that come behind you don't go through the same thing that you went through. And I think pandering, if it's done right, it could be useful. But then again, we've seen plenty of times when pandering has gone wrong, and it shows.
So I guess, and I'll be quick with it, is so I mean, it can help. What I could say is it can help get you attention. Like, so if we think about the primary, I mean, I guess you can debate what things people said were pandering, but there were things that can go viral and can get you more attention, right? And then that can get you donations, even a little bit of controversy, which sometimes can be good. I mean, I don't know if you could say that Ying's Asian dad jokes, the cringy kind of little Asian dad jokes, were pandering. I think it was just kind of a way of kind of breaking the ice, getting some attention. Not all. I'm Asian, so I know a lot of doctors. Now, I mean, is he really trying to get the Asian vote with that? And even not, but like it gets you attention and it gets some headlines talking. And I think that in some cases, like, yeah, there are times where people just see right through it. You get mocked on Twitter. But there are other times where, like, you're having some fun, you reach out to a group, you really should have a good connection. Like Trump going, I love Mexicans with his little taco and Trump Tower that's not the model of how to do this kind of outrage.
It's like a taco bowl, which I don't even think is like
oh God, was it really that? Oh no.
I could be. I don't know but I don't think a taco bowl is a Mexican. I could be wrong though. I don't know. I just know that they usually don't do like hard tacos. Like, I feel like Mexicans usually do like soft.
I thought that they had all of it. Because I think
I could be wrong. I'm not.
I'm not sure. I know though, like. So I mean, yeah, because it's hard for me to define exactly what pandering things have happened where I could say, oh yeah, that worked. Because again, I'm not really following a lot of like local elections, and then even with the national elections, I mean. I don't know, like what, or even the midterms of 2018, right? It's like I don't know, were people pandering? It was pretty focused on message, healthcare, and a lot of other things. Or in case of like AOC, overturn the system. But I haven't really seen like some recent elections in my mind where I can really think there was pandering that has happened. Like people have been very consistent and good. Like, well, even last year's elections in like Kentucky, Louisiana, and I think Virginia, and even New York had elections. I mean, people are pretty issue focused and consistent with their issues. I do know there's one guy who I was hearing on the radio last year, and actually he must be, I guess, being voted in probably in the fall. I don't think it was because it was New York City Council. It was a guy from Palestine who's actually he's a minister. He's Christian, and it was an interesting little spiel they did on the radio. And he was trying to appeal to the Arab community in that New York district. And how I guess a lot of them don't vote because they don't really want to be recognized by the government because they just don't trust. I mean, understandably, with some of what we've done abroad, like they don't really have a lot of trust in the U.S. So a lot of them just don't vote. But this guy was trying to reach out, and again, I mean, that's not really pandering. That's really like that's what people might see as pandering, but is actually you kind of have to do is reach out to the community, find out why certain people are not engaged, and try to speak to those issues. So I mean, if you're doing that, that's good. That'll help you win. If it's just like a very kind of cheesy, very cheesy line, I mean, no. It's actually interesting, and I mean, I know we're at our end, but a few things that like I've seen that people will call pandering. Like you can do certain things and you get backlash as pandering. One of them, of course, was the black church that we mentioned that Yang was in. One of them was actually, I remember that Joe Biden had some event maybe in South Carolina with fried chicken. And a bunch of people on Twitter were like, "Oh, you just think you can show up with fried chicken and we'll vote for you?" And it's like, I don't think that's exactly what was the intent. Was to be like, "Oh, fried chicken, the blacks will get me now." Like,
come on, Toby. I said, "Come on, Toby."
Yeah. Yes, and it's just like, and then of course, like, there's just so much. One example I would use was when Yang was dancing after like a debate or rally, sometime like September or something, to I think it was Return of the Mac, and like it kind of went viral. But there were some black people who were like, "Oh, you think these politicians can just dance for us and we'll vote?" And it's like, no, I think some people just like having fun. So I mean.
Right.
Some people will do that to pander and to try to, I guess, seem hip. And yeah, it can be a little cheesy, but sometimes people are just having fun too. Like, as long as it's not straight up disrespectful to a community, I think leaning into that stuff isn't inherently bad. But it's kind of also like, who told you to do this? Like, if someone really did not advise you to do certain ads or certain outreach, it may be the best that you don't do it. But some things just on your own, you're having fun and it might look a certain way. I mean, go for it. The negative publicity, I don't think is enough to outweigh the buzz. Not that the buzz will make people vote for you per se, but sometimes you need to keep yourself relevant. So
Right.
I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do think that like what you were just saying, Toby, about like he was listening to like or dancing to like a rap song, and like some black people, I guess in the comments were like, "Oh, just because you're doing that, you think you're gonna get our vote?" It's like, it's times like that I got to remind myself that the internet isn't as like influential in politics as like you think it is. Like it is influential. I'm not gonna like downplay it at all, but like how active we are in it, compared to like just like the average Joe, like it can't even like really compare. But I agree. Like when it comes like, I believe that bad publicity is better than no publicity. Like I feel like, like when Yang was saying like, oh, like we got to stop talking about Donald Trump because that's how he wins. It's like, yeah, it's true. Because it's just like, even if it's bad, even if it's good, even if it's like, what have you, then, it just like brings a whole bunch of attention. But with pandering, like, I guess you have to know your base. You have to know who you're talking to. I guess like, black people, like it's sort of, like a bit like of a, I guess like, I don't know, like an anomaly almost, like to like some politicians where it's just like you're the person in Michigan, Ronald, the lady in Michigan, like she just didn't know how to talk back. I'm sure she was just wanting to be careful to not like pander and like come off as like like an ignorant like white lady. And I do feel that like people can definitely see right through people, like definitely see right through you. Like one of my stand-up classes, I remember like the teacher taught us that like you can only really tell jokes about things that or people that So I can't really just like go and just like start making Asian jokes and start talking in like an Asian accent.
Thanks.
Because like, but I can, like maybe mimic and talk about like an Asian friend or an Asian coworker of mine. But I can't just say like random generalized things about Asian people and do like an Asian accent and like, because the audience will see right through that.
Right.
So like when it comes to, of course, like with pandering, like we can tell, I guess like my point is like, we can tell if Black people, if you're friends with Black people, if, you're comfortable around Black people, if you interact with Black people, on a daily basis, like we could definitely like see right through that. So like, but I do feel that, people, definitely like make this pandering thing like a lot bigger than it actually is, especially when it's like, oh, he's listening to rap music, he thinks he's down, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, rap music has been around since what, like 1978? Like, yeah, it's like it's on the radio, it's not like it's hidden anymore. It's out there, like it's not that like I understand that we sometimes still like get caught off guard when like like if like a non-Black person just says like, oh, I love Killer Cam or something, like someone who's like a little bit more obscure, rather than like, oh, I love Drake. It's like, oh, I love Tech Nine, like something like that. But we gotta like kind of catch ourselves too, just be like, it's possible that this person probably just loves rap music, like what's not to like,
Yeah.
So yeah, like I don't know what my point was. It was probably in there somewhere.
I got you. No, I feel what you're saying.
I got you. I feel what you're saying. But you're absolutely right too. Because if you don't know your audience is going to see right through you. But if you know your audience well enough to be able to deliver a message that your audience is able to respond, that's key. That is so key. You are so right. All right, ladies and gents, we are out of here. You guys, it's been nice. It's been real. Please remember to smash the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell. And as always, we thank you for watching. And for those new subscribers, thank you for subscribing to the channel. We will see you guys next week. With that, we are out of here.
Thank you all for tuning in. Have a good night.
See ya. Have a good night.